Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you and also co-organizers for this opportunity to present our results and work about alcoholic fermentation in Brazil, and also uh, what we have doing about to how to increase the industrial productivity and reduction of vinaceous volumes of fermentations with recycling of yeast cells and high ethanol concentrations. Okay. I am Mario Lopez. I'm scientific director at Fermentech, a small company of consulting services, research, and engineering services here in Brazil. And I would like to start my presentation, my lecture, talking about the ethanol production in Brazil. Um, in 1973, we faced oil crisis worldwide. And here in Brazil, 2 years later, the Brazilian government launched the Pro-Alcohol program to stimulate the ethanol production by Brazilian distilleries. And 2 years later, in 1977, Fermentech was launched to help distilleries to improve their process regarding the ethanol production. Nowadays, Fermentech has 50 people working in consulting services, research, and development of new technologies, and our headquarters is in Piracicaba, state of São Paulo, Brazil. São Paulo is the biggest ethanol producer in Brazil. And we have 60 clients or 60 distilleries that produce 30% of all ethanol in Brazil. Then we have good partners and good companies working together, Fermentech, to improve the ethanol production in Brazil. Okay. Well, uh, talking about ethanol production in Brazil, nowadays we have 368 distilleries producing ethanol, and these distilleries crushed 655 million tons of sugarcane a year, and the same distilleries produce sugar and ethanol, but almost 30 billion liters of ethanol are produced a year by Brazilian distilleries. This ethanol volume is enough to move it more than 50 million cars. Here we have two kinds of fuel, just ethanol or a blending of ethanol and gasoline, okay? And Brazilian cars may use just ethanol or the blending ethanol and gasoline. Okay? But the Brazilian distilleries have special characteristics. All these distilleries are based in Melet-Boineau process. This process was developed by Firmino Boineau, a French guy from Melet region in France in the 1930 years. This fermentation process is a feed batch process, but we have some distilleries that work as continuous fermentations, and different from other fermentations in the world. The Brazilian process is a fast fermentation. In just 6 to 10 hours, the fermentation process is finished. Okay. Fermentation is run in large fermenters between 300,000 to 3 million liters each fermenter, each tank of fermentation. Some distilleries have 6, 7, or even 8, 9, or 10 fermenters, okay? And a very special characteristic is a high yeast cells density or high yeast cells concentration inside of these fermenters. Then imagine a tank with 1 million liters and 10% of yeast cells, the microorganism. We have inside these fermenters around 100 tons of cells, 100 tons of yeast, living yeast, okay? And the special characteristic, another special characteristic of this process is all these yeast cells are recycling, are reused in the next fermentation steps. At the end of fermentation, the wine and the cells are centrifuged, and the cells, the yeast cells, are separated to be used in the next cycle of fermentation. We are reusing 400 times the yeast cells during a year, okay? And the average concentration of ethanol in the wine is around 8.5% volume by volume. Okay, this picture shows you a description how the process works in Brazil. We have the sugarcane juice and molasses must from sugarcane that they use it to feed the fermentation tanks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 tanks. These tanks have 10, 12% of yeast cells, okay? We have big tanks. After 10, 12 hours, the fermentation is finished, and all this content from the fermentation tanks are centrifuged to separate the wine that goes to distillation and the yeast cream that goes to sulfuric acid treatment, but weak sulfuric acid treatment, pH 2.5. And this treatment is necessary to kill bacterial contaminants in the process. After this acid treatment, the yeast are recycled and returned to fermentation tanks, okay? You can see here a picture, some fermenters, and also the centrifuges that are used for centrifugation steps and or industrial process. Okay, but talking about ethanol concentration, productivity, and reduction of vinasse volume, how to improve the industrial process working with high ethanol concentration during the alcoholic fermentation. This picture shows you what could be done regarding ethanol concentration. Here in the first tank, in the first picture, you can see the same volume, 1 million liters. All fermenters have the same volume, 1 million liters. However, the ethanol concentrations are increased. How it's possible to increase this ethanol concentration? When we are increasing the sugar concentration in the juice or in the sugarcane must, right? Then the volume of ethanol are increasing too. Another way is to maintain the same production or the same production of ethanol, but to reduce the volume of wine. It's impossible also. It is another configuration, another way to increase the ethanol concentration, but the end volume of ethanol will be the same, okay? Both configurations are possible in industrial scale, right? We have monitored, follow different industries, different distilleries, and some distilleries have found very important results regarding the productivity of ethanol. Here we can see a case study from a distillery. It's a real case. It's a distillery, a Fermentec client, okay, that share these results with us. In this case, you can see a correlation, a positive correlation between ethanol concentration in the wine and ethanol production per week, okay? When we are increasing the ethanol concentration in the wine, we are also increasing the production of ethanol by distillery. When this distillery reached concentrations above 10% of ethanol, they got the best results, the best indicators regard the productivity. Each red dots that you can see here in this picture represents the average of data from 1 week. Every day, the distilleries, they are measuring industrial indicators like ethanol concentration, production, fermentation yield, and weight. Each red dots represents 1 week, the average of 1 week, okay? And for every 1% more in ethanol concentration, this is, all right? In the same distilleries, it's okay now? The slide changed to you? Oh, okay. This picture shows another correlation between ethanol concentration and fermentation yield. For every 1% more in ethanol concentration, the same distillery increased 1.12% in the fermentation yield. Oh, okay. You can ask me, wow, but just 1%. It sounds like very few ethanol, or not so important. However, imagine a distillery producing 1 million liters of ethanol a day. Just 1% represents 10,000 liters of ethanol a day. During 200 days working in a year, we have more than 2 million liters of ethanol production, just increasing 1% of fermentation yield, okay? And here we can see another correlation from the same distillery, that they are able to reduce the ethanol losses in vinasses. Vinasses is a stillage, the byproduct, the main byproduct from distilleries. Then, when they increased ethanol concentration in the wine, in the fermentation, it was possible to reduce the losses of ethanol in vinasses. This picture, this table, show you the main results. Increasing ethanol concentration, how much ethanol could be done more per week, the increment in fermentation yield, and also how much ethanol could be reduced in the vinasses or stillage, right? It's very, very important. Several distilleries in Brazil, they are improving their process nowadays. Think about what they need to do to improve or to increase ethanol concentration in the wine, to reduce losses, to improve fermentation yield, and to increase ethanol productivity or production by ethanol by week. Another aspect, very important aspect, directly linked to ethanol concentration in the wine is the reduction of vinasse volume. When we are increasing the ethanol concentration in the fermentation, we are reducing the vinasses volume. Vinasses is the stillage, and Brazilian distilleries use to apply vinasses for fertigation of sugarcane. It's a very nice process. Why? Because the nutrients that sugarcane removed from soil return to the sugarcane fields through vinasses of fertigation, right? Then we can save fertilizer, we can balance the nutrients in the soil, and also uh, fertigation save sugarcane when we are in the dry season, for example. But the main question is, why should we reduce vinasses volume? Well, if vinasse use it for sugarcane fertigation and to return the nutrients removed by sugarcane, well, it's a good question. Imagine for each liter of ethanol produced by distilleries, Brazilian distilleries, we are producing more than 12 liters of vinasses. Yes, it's true. For each liter of ethanol, we are producing 12.4 liters of vinasses in average. These vinasses, we need to transport these vinasses to the sugarcane fields. How this volume of vinasses is transported or applied, distributed in the field by or using distribution canals or in some cases trucks. And trucks need diesel, need petroleum, okay? And we have costs to transport vinasses to the field. Then one reason to reduce the vinasses volume is to reduce costs of fertilizers, diesel, and CO2 emissions by trucks. When we are working in a traditional process, fermentation process, with ethanol concentrations around 8% of ethanol in the wine, for example, this picture shows you a typical example. We have around 3 grams of potassium per liter of vinasses, okay? But when we increase the ethanol concentration in the vinasses, we are working with a more concentrated vinasses and concentration of potassium. Then we have we have less vinasses, a lower volume of vinasses to be transported to the field. The quantity of potassium is the same, but in the second case, we have a more concentrated potassium in vinasses, more concentration of fertilizers in vinasses. Why? Because fermentation process was carried out with increased concentration of ethanol from 8 to 12%. In this case, see how important is this picture. We can eliminate or reduce one truck in the transport of vinasse to the field. We are talking here at kilometers, a long distance, 12, 20 kilometers to transport this vinasse. It's a very impressive results. It is another case that show you the history from 16 years see the importance of this data from a distillery, another client, Fermentec client, that in 2003, they used to work with 7.9, around 8% of ethanol in the wine, in the blue line, and you can see the evolution of ethanol concentration year by year until to reach 10.9% in ethanol concentration in the wine. On the same time, you can see the results, you can see the reduction of vinasse volume year by year from 12.4 liters to less than 9 liters of vinasses per liter of ethanol. Increasing ethanol concentration in wine, it was possible to reduce more than 460 million liters of stillage of vinasses per year. It was a great result and save costs with diesel, CO2 emissions, and also this distillery had another advantage to reduce vinasses volume because vinasses could be transported for longer distances because the volume is lower than a traditional process. This table shows you a relation between ethanol concentrations in wine and the volumes of vinasses. You can see here that while we are increasing ethanol concentrations in the wine from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, to 11, 12%, we are reducing the volume of vinasses in relation to volume of ethanol produced by this distillery, okay? When we have more ethanol or high concentrations of ethanol in the wine, we have less volume of vinasses produced by ethanol. And also, you can see here how much diesel could be saved for 1 million liters of ethanol produced by this distillery. Then we are increasing the ethanol concentration, reducing the volume of vinasses, and saved or reducing costs with diesel to move trucks that transport vinasses to the field, sugarcane field. Well, why should we increase ethanol concentrations? Here, we have 5 reasons to convince you that how important it is to increase ethanol concentrations in our fermentation process. The first one, to increase industrial productivity and fermentation yield, as you saw in the first example. Moreover, increasing ethanol concentration in wine is also a way to reduce the losses of ethanol in vinasses. Okay? Third, increasing ethanol concentration in the wine allows to reduce the volume of vinasses per liter of ethanol produced. There is a clear and direct correlation between ethanol, volume of ethanol produced, and volume of vinasses, reduction of volume of vinasses. 4, to reduce vinasses, also we can save costs with transport and distribution of these vinasses in the sugarcane field. And the last one, we are saving fertilizers because because potassium, the main mineral in vinasses, will be transported back to the sugarcane fields or even for longer distance from distilleries. saving the use of fertilizers. The last slide, the last question that I brought to you, what do we need to do to increase ethanol concentrations in the wine? Of course, all these distilleries, Brazilian distilleries that went to increase ethanol concentrations in fermentation process, need to work with five important questions. First, regarding the sugarcane juice and molasses quality, okay? Well-controlled fermentation process, temperature, pH, velocity of juice feeding, bacterial contamination, all these parameters, industrial parameters, need to be very well controlled, very well monitored. Of course, we need robust yeast strains like FT858, Fermel, or even customized strains that could be support high ethanol concentrations. But see, a difference, very important difference regarding other ethanol fermentations in the world is that recycling yeast cells need the cells are living at the end of fermentation, okay? Because once the yeast cells die, you don't go ahead with the process. For this reason, we need robust strains, resistant strains to support high ethanol concentrations in the fermentation process. Of course, trained people how to that need to be prepared to identify problems, but to solve problems faster. And of course, the last one, a good project engineering project like this that you are saying that was done by Fermentech team of engineering process. Okay. Following all these tips, you will get success to improve it, to increase the ethanol concentration in wine, increase in productivity, fermentation yield, reducing costs of vinasses transport, and to improve this process, industrial process. Okay, I finished my lecture, my presentation. I would like to thank you again. Here, all Fermentech team that have worked for 44 years and improving the fermentation process in Brazil and other process worldwide. Thank you by your attention. You're welcome. I'm here for any question or doubts that you have. Thank you very much.